Hello, all you positive heads out there. It's so good to be back with all you beautiful reflections of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. If you're new to this podcast, of course, we are super happy to have you here, and we just ask that you bring an open mind and heart to your listening experience and to be prepared to explore vantage points that I'm convinced will help shift or solidify your current understanding of the ultimate nature of reality in a way that is extremely empowering. Speaking of exploring powerful perspectives, I'm super excited to announce the release of my very first book, The Golden Key: Modern Alchemy to Unlock Infinite Abundance. If you're ready to alchemize the circumstances in your life so that your abundance expands to an entirely new level in 2021, head over to goldenkey.gift to download the audio or ebook as my gift to you by using the code POSITIVEHEAD. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm very excited to have Joe McQuillen here with me on the show. Joe is a self-described blue-collar guy who ended up on an unplanned for path in life as an author, writing several books which highlight his search and ultimate connection with his son who passed away, or as I prefer to say, was born into non-physical as a very young man. Hello there, Joe. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Brandon, thank you very much for having me. I sure do appreciate it.
Yes, this is something. It's funny. I was just talking with a friend last night about, she who has 4 children and how it's like sort of the greatest fear is losing a child, and to go through that and then spin it into and turn it into something so positive and healing for, not only yourself, but all those who are impacted by your work is super, super inspiring. So I want to dive deep into that.
Sure.
Before we do, I would like to start with my cliche opener. And my cliche opening question is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You got 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
Getting the message to parents who've lost children that they're still around them. They're still accessible. They're still part of their lives. It would take me 1 floor, Brandon, to get that out there.
Yeah. Well, I know there's some, there's some people that will hear this who instantly get the chills or excitement. Those who have went down that very challenging, path as a human being, transitioning into non-physical before their child does, are I'm sure they're all ears in this moment. Like, please share some of your experience that will bring some level of relief. Because as I said, it's always been my greatest fear as a father. And I know my mother, I think back to my mother, has always been like such a, pretty like fearful, like overly protective of her children, And so, and I know that's in all of us to varying degrees, but why don't you, if you would, share
Sure.
whatever feels pertinent about your backstory as an individual, and then of course you can transition at any point into, sort of what's transpired, with you and the passing of your son and how it led you here.
Thanks, Brandon, and I will. And I think, you got to understand that I'm Irish, and being Irish means I don't know how to tell a short story, but I'm going to do my best.
I'm with you. That's the highest makeup in my genetic profile is English Irish. So I think that's why I love stories.
And we're story sellers. We're Sanashees, that goes back into our DNA. So, and it is, and people call me an author, and because I've written 2 books, but the truth matters, I'm a storyteller. The story is true. And that's what makes this such an amazing tale of a journey, because there's a message that says they're not gone. And let me flash back to in December of January 2016, my son was home from school for Christmas break with a bunch of buddies, and they all decided to kick up their heels as they had on the last weekend before going back. And they decided to go to a friend's lake house. There's a beautiful lake house on a small lake in Wisconsin, about an hour and a half north of them. And spend the night, come home on Sunday, and then everybody head to school after the weekend. So Sally and I were kind of, Chris, like his old man, was a little wild. I'm 36 years sober because I was a bit of a wild colonial boy in my youth. So we were kind of relieved. We thought, okay, they're going up to Scotty's house in Wisconsin. How much trouble can they get into? Right. Better than going into the city and so we were pretty happy about, that move. The next day was a Sunday. When Chris was home for vacation, it wasn't unusual for him not to come home at night. He'd text, I'm at this guy's house, this pal's house. Yeah. So this was a plan. So, they went up there and they went to a local tavern, and there was a dozen of them. And
how old was he?
He was 21. They were all 21, okay. 22 years old.
Got it.
A dozen guys and gals. And they shot pool at a local pub and brought the heart party back to the lake house. And at 3:00 in the morning, Chris and three friends, one that I knew very, very well, and two that it was a big high school group. I mean, there were 2,000 kids in his class, so they didn't know each other. So they went outside and walked past a boathouse, and four guys jumped in a 3-man canoe with a snoot full of alcohol and layered clothing and unlaced Timberland boots, which is a story that kind of takes its own path, partially frozen in the lake, paddled out. None of them made it back. I got a call.
None of them made it back.
None of them made it back. All four. Transitioned that day. So I was driving up to, I didn't know, I got a message that said, Mr. McHugh, Chris and three friends are missing. I jumped in the car and grabbed my Labrador, threw her in the car and some hunting boots. And literally, Brandon, I expected to find him in somebody else's cottage with a pretty co-ed, or, passed out on, right. Somebody else's bunk bed. And halfway up, I get a call that said, Mr. McHugh, this is Scotty's uncle. I live in the neighborhood. And I just want to report that it's no longer a search, but a recovery. All four drowned. So you kind of go into a bit of a shock, to be honest with you, and so I continued to ride up. But one thing came flashing back to me, Brandon, was, 15, 16 years before, on a whim, I went and saw a medium. Her name is Nancy Myers, and she's out in Arizona these days. And I saw her a few years ago. She's a good girl. I went and saw her, and there wasn't really any sense of urgency. Like a lot of big Irish Catholic families, we had people on the other side, but other than one brother who took his life in the 70s, everybody had left at a normal time, in normal order. Yeah. Maybe a little early, Yeah. But in normal order. So I finished the I finished the ride. I was going up, and I thought back on that day, and at that medium meeting, she'd, run through grandmothers, this and that. And I'm like, ho hum, let me get back to work. And she said, but your dad's here. And he's showing me a caboose, and he's telling me railroad, telling you, so it's him. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look behind me on the right there below the Irish castle, there is a lantern, a railroad lantern, the Canadian Pacific Railroad. That I probably shouldn't have, but But we were a railroad family. My dad spent 40 years on the railroad. Every one of the boys worked on the railroad in school, and I stayed on as a brakeman on the railroad. So when the old man said railroad, it hit a nerve. I said, wait a minute, that means this was 2000. There was no internet. There was no Google. There was no Facebook to find out what a blue collar guy in Buffalo, New York worked on the railroad. This woman knew me as Joe, only Joe. So all of a sudden it was like, all right, I'm going to put this in a file cabinet in my mind, that my old man somewhere, now he didn't give me the secrets to the universe. He didn't give me any lottery numbers, he just let me know he was there. So I'm driving up this Wisconsin 16 years later. And I thought, wait a minute, if Iron Joe is somewhere accessible, Chris is with him. I mean, that's how my family rolls, right?
Yeah, right.
It is a clan. And so, that hit me. And then I thought, all right, I need to find out what that means. And that started my search.
Mm. Wow. I can't imagine going through that to healthy, young, vibrant, and just made a careless decision, right?
And we all make them.
Right,
the fact
right.
That I had, I had young and crazy and stupid and smashed cars and done reckless things. And somehow I got a hall pass. Now Christopher had 2 near-death experiences. One, he flipped a car. He was working on a ranch in Arizona, and he flipped a pickup truck I sent out to him. And it was like a tin can, and all he had was a sprained wrist, right? Mm-hmm. And another time he was going to, another time he was hiking up in Havasupai, and he was a life coach at the ranch and taking kids. There were kids with addiction from 14 to 18, and he was serving as a life coach.
Wow.
And the leader made a mistake and let these kids go into a cave when they were hiking up in the mountains. And Chris fell down a mine shaft. There was a 100-foot mine shaft, and he landed 30 feet. He landed 30 feet on a ledge, broke his shoulder, broke his foot. I mean, messed him up pretty bad. And later on, this is how detached I was from that metaphysical at that point, Brandon. He said to me, Dad, when I was down there was this guy in white that was helping me not go into shock. And so I assumed it was one of the rescue guys or one of the guys from the ranch. Later on, when I got to Imbalance, or when I got to Tucson and Scottsdale and was with him in the hospital for that week, I talked to them. They said there was nobody down there. Now,
wow.
Not only now do I know, is what everybody listening knows, that was an angel.
Yeah.
Right. But at the time I had, for me, angel was something that we prayed to when we were in grammar school.
Right.
It had no bearing. So, so he had, and the third, what I've been told, the author wrote a book called The Happy Medium. It was, I think her name's Russo, but it was a wonderful book. And she said the third near-death experience is always the cash in. It always happens. Now, why are there 3? I don't know. There's a lot of rules out there that I don't know anything about. I know some of them now, but a lot I don't know. So this was his third near-death experience, and it caused him to transition, So I started researching, read Bob Olson's book, who's out there in California. He was an investigator in LA. Mm-hmm. Really wonderful book. And I read that. I started seeing everybody, seeing mediums. I saw Thomas John. I got these amazing feedbacks. And the very first time I called that woman back who I had seen right after Chris transitioned. And her name was Nancy, as I said, and I called her right after Chris died. And she told me things about the accident that I didn't know for a fact until I got the coroner's report.
Wow.
And she told me about Christopher's transition, and she told me about him, crossing through and visiting me. I woke up at 3:00 in the morning that morning and just couldn't shake it. It was like, it felt like one of those dreams where you go to school without your homework, or you're walking around in your boxers, in school or something.
Yeah.
I just couldn't shake it. And it turns out that he visited me on the way, which is now I know is commonplace.
Yeah.
What I basically learned, Brandon, is that they're a rice paper wall away from us when they transition.
Right.
And so that was my thing. Was all right. I'm not a naive guy. I don't look like a naive guy. I got a brush cut. I got a broken nose. I got chapped lips from from shoveling my driveway. So I'm not going to buy into anything, hook, line, and sinker. I was a car dealer, for criminy's sakes, for many years.
Right.
So
you've seen all the BS that someone can throw.
I'm 2 things: I can't be bullied and I can't be hustled. That's it, right?
Yeah.
And so I knew that this might end up with me finding out this is all hokey BS, metaphysical BS.
Yeah.
I knew that was a possibility. And the more I looked, the more I went, the more I encountered, the more I found out that was just the opposite. Chris came through. Chris told me things. I had another session with her, and we're still friends, Nancy Meyer. She's out in Surprise, Arizona. My son was working, my other baby boy, who's 22, was working spring training for a buddy of mine. And so I went out and spent a little time with him and had lunch with Nancy, and she's a wonderful medium and a good gal, but now I'm at this point, I'm hungry. I've done a bunch of research. I really believe this now.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to tell you the moment. This is an important moment. This is the moment I went from believing to knowing, and that's night and day. Two entirely different things, right?
Right.
So people said, did you believe in God? And I said, I believe in God similarly the way I'd believe in the Secretary of the Interior, right? I know they exist, but there's no interaction between us too much. God did his thing, I did mine, and we were good.
Yeah.
And that all changed here. And the one thing I'll tell you about that changing is the first 3 days after Christopher had drowned, I had come home and getting the body shipped back from Wisconsin to Illinois, state lines, and finding a grave and finding a marker and finding churches and masses and readings and receptions and all that stuff. You got to do that, dude. I mean, it's not like a wedding planner. You're on, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
And so I would come home and Christopher's godfather was with me the entire week, step by step. And I would come home at the end of the night and I would get on my knees and I'd do what I always do. I thank God for my sobriety and my family. But I said to God, we're not good, you and me, buddy. We're not good. Yeah. You took my kid.
Yeah.
On the third night, I got a feedback back. It said, I didn't take your son. His recklessness and free will caused him to come home early, and I welcomed him. And remember, I lost a son too. So it was at that point, Brandon, that I knew I was guilty. I was worried. Was Christopher paying for my past sins? What was, and at that point I knew God didn't move us around like chess pieces, and that, life happens. People say to me all the time, life, that's not fair. And I say, what fair is? Fair is where you go to ride the merry-go-round and eat candy corn. You know what I mean?
Right.
Fair doesn't figure into it.
Right.
So I had this literally revelation that, God was welcoming my son and holding me up during this time. Right. Yeah, he wasn't the protagonist, so that relationship changed entirely, so now flash forward 6 months. I've seen a couple of mediums. I went to see some spirit circles, mediums, sit in on some John Holland, who was a brilliant medium and had some amazing situations. But now I wanted to go and instead of being on the phone with a gal in Arizona, I wanted to go to a medium and look in his eyes while he's looking at my son. Right. I was greedy and I was on a mission, bro.
Yeah.
So two things. One is just kind of give you a little clue about, who you got on your show here. Right after Chris was buried January 8th, 2016. And like I said, when you and I talked, it's 3 degrees here, snow, frost, call it, boom. So he was interred there and we had bought a number of plots and we put him on the end because it was near a tree. Now the woman didn't tell me they were burying him next to another couple. So even though we had these other plots, it looked like it was his, he was their son. And that wasn't going to do. It's my kid, so I held my breath. I stamped my feet. I yelled, I threw things. And eventually I wrote a check and I moved him over one plot and I'll occupy the plot that he was in. And good news to the Shermans because I snore, but so here we are in June 30th, 2017, 6 months after Christopher transition. Because I don't like to say died and I don't like to say drowned,
Yeah.
And so 6 months after he transitioned, the night before or a couple of days before, I ordered shamrock seeds because the dirt had been, they had reinterred him, so the dirt was loose. So I thought, I'm gonna do some shamrock seeds around his grave. Yeah. And then on the way out the door, so I made an appointment with a guy named Andrew Anderson. It was on Bob Olson's website, and he rated by states and locations, and he had a good rating. And he was about a half hour from my house. I go, let's take a shot at this cat. And besides, I can always cancel, right? I always have an escape plan. Plan B is always foolproof. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
I'm not getting trapped. I know how to make an Irish goodbye better than anybody on the planet. So on the way out the door, I grabbed those shamrock seeds. Now, nobody knew I was doing that. I wasn't hiding it. They just showed up. My wife is busy. She's a therapist. I grabbed them, went out the door. I was going to stop at the grave before I saw Andrew Anderson at his house. I went to my dresser and pulled out that leather bracelet that says Dad on it.
Mm.
Christopher had given me that when he was 5 years old. We were at Disney World.
Mm.
And I wore it that weekend and threw it in my dresser, with the stuff the kids give you, with the painted, banquet that looks like a race car and the handprints, so I put it in there. So I grabbed that and put it on my sleeve and stopped to the grave, planted the shamrock seeds. To this day, this spring, shamrocks will come up again. It's just amazing. It's a wonderful affirmation. Talked to him a little bit, shot out to see Andrew, and walked in, and it was a typical, medium's office with big crystals and posters of balloons and Chinese lanterns, and I always laugh because it's like, these guys got one decorator, they work from a website, mediumoffice.com.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed, I sat down and he was a warm fella, and we're friends to this day, and I still see him occasionally as a medium and also as a pal, and he'll have spirit circles and I'll show up occasionally. So I go in there and he said, all right, he wanted to see a picture of Chris. He didn't know anything about me. Didn't know my name, just Joe. Yep. So I brought a couple of pictures of Chris, and Chris, dancing, celebrating, and Tommy Bahama shirts. And Chris was a fun kid. And he said, your son is beautiful. He looks like Brad Pitt, and he loves that because he said he looked like Brad Pitt. And he said, but he wasn't always happy. There was sadness sometimes, and we knew that. There was depression, there was some, alcohol abuse, what I mean? We knew about it. And you do you do your best, but some of the stuff's just, over your pay grade. And so we were supportive and loving and, and I said, yeah, I knew that. He said, your family is saying that they were together last night for an anniversary. What was that about? And I said, well, that was Sally and my 30th anniversary, or 25th wedding anniversary at the time. And he goes, yeah, your family came together. You got a lot of family on the other side. He said, how many siblings you got left on this side? And I said, I got 5. She goes, no, he said, no, you got 1. I said, no, I got 5. He said, no, you got 1. It's like, look, dude, I'm writing the check, and then I stopped and thought that our family there were 5 of us. And I was born January 1957. December 1956, there was a car accident. My uncle killed his wife and left 5 kids. My mom and dad took in those 5 kids, made it 10 kids.
Wow.
So I had 1 sibling left, which was Marcia, who's transitioned and was Christopher's godmother. But and that's how cool. I'm telling him 5. He's telling me 1.
Yeah.
And he was right. 1 blood sibling.
Right.
So it was like, okay, Kat, you got my attention. Then he said, Christopher acknowledges that you're wearing the bracelet he gave you.
Wow.
And I'm not going in with a science that I have Christopher's bracelet.
Yeah, right.
I want this guy to earn his dough. And if it's BS, by the way, Brandon, let's strike it off the list and go figure something else out. Right?
Yep. Sure.
And then he said, Christopher acknowledges that you were at his grave planting something today.
Wow.
That's the moment, dude. That's the moment, Brandon. I went from believing this is all true to knowing, and I never looked back. I've never looked back since then.
Wow. Yeah, that's some pretty detailed, real-time, non-verifiable, affirmation. Wow.
And the cool thing is, that's what they are. They give me insights. He gives me insights, but a lot of it's affirmation and just saying, dude, I'm still here.
Yeah.
So, on the anniversary of his transition, January 3rd, 2017. Now, I'd been taking copious notes, which is a great term for a blue-collar kid from Buffalo, New York, right? I've been taking copious notes, writing every medium session. I record it, then transcribe it. All of this. I have these notes. I'm putting it away, and what I think I'm going to do, Brandon, is someday I'm going to sit on a rocking chair with a cigar and read these notes to feel close to my son.
Yeah,
that was my intention. But Chris had another one. So on January 7th or January 3rd, 2017, I started in the previous year getting woken up at 3:00 in the morning. Now, I thought it was because 3:00 in the morning is when Chris transitioned.
Yeah.
Turns out he transitioned between 3 and 4. Now, on his anniversary this year, he told me it was 3:46. How's that? He said, by the way,
Wow.
this is the time I transitioned. I looked down at my watch. It was 3:46.
Wow.
It was 3:00 in the morning. And I thought, okay, that's why. And then I found out that isn't why, that this is 3:00, 3 to 4 is what's called the bewitching hour, where spirits are most active. And like my mind goes like, okay, well, how do they know if it's central, mountain, eastern?
Yeah. Right.
But that's their time, right? So I'd been getting up at 3:00 in the morning, coming in his office, lighting sage, burning candles, holding a crystal, putting a picture of him, aligning my chakra. Now, do I look like a guy that would align my chakras?
Wouldn't be my first guess as a chakra aligner.
Right. Who's the chakra guy in this, to tell the truth? Not that guy.
Yeah.
Not that guy that looks like a pug,
Yeah.
So now this is the first anniversary. So all of a sudden I'm doing this and meditating, and I start getting messages from Chris, and he's describing heaven, telling me about the colors, telling me I'm going to friggin', wait, you're not going to friggin' believe this place. It's great, Dad. He said, The air is love. It's love air. He said, the colors, the greens are vibrant, blues, purple hues, gorgeous. Then he said to me, so like, I'm thinking like, okay, are you leaving the reservation here? Are we losing our mind here?
Yeah.
Then he told me, he said, Dad, you got to let go of the resentment. I love Scotty. He loved me. He was a pal. Wasn't his fault.
Yeah.
And I thought, and Scotty's the kid whose parents owned the lake house.
Gotcha.
Now, remember we talked about me being Irish. Irish Alzheimer's, is you forget everything but the grudges, right?
You're right.
God straightened me out. I couldn't be mad at God anymore. So I was mad at Scotty's parents, right?
Yeah.
Rich kid, it's his fault.
Yeah.
It wasn't his fault. Could have been at my house. Could have been at a hockey rink. Could have been anywhere.
Yeah. Yep.
We talked about our reckless youth, right? And it easily could have been anywhere in any of us. So I said, okay, Chris, for you, I'll let go of this, right? No problem.
Yeah.
And besides, when will I ever see Scotty again? Right? I'm not going to see him.
Yeah.
So anniversary is that day, and Sally and I are going to meet at sundown and put a Chinese lantern up in the air and celebrate our boy. But instead, around 3:30, I got a text from one of his college buddies who are like family to me, these kids.
Yeah.
Still, we're part of it. We go to their weddings. We're their christenings.
Oh, wow.
I have a golf outing. They show up every year.
Wow.
Every year at the anniversary, we meet at the grave. And this was the first time. And they said, Mr. McHugh, a few of us are meeting at the grave at 3:30. Wow. Can you meet us?
Yeah.
So, of course I did. I threw the hockey cooler in the truck with some beer and some Gatorade and a box of cigars and pulled up. When I got out of the car, Brandon, there were 40 kids at the grave.
Wow.
40. Grammar
This is
school,
year anniversary.
1 year anniversary. It was impromptu. They get on that coconut telegraph that they get on, and they put it around, and they all showed up.
Wow.
One of the first people I saw was Scotty. So not only was Christopher getting me to a higher level by releasing a resentment, he was also preparing me to see him. I didn't have to duck him. I didn't have to look down.
Scotty was not one of the kids in the boat.
No, it was his house.
Yeah, got it.
They were at Scotty's house. He was not one of the four, but Scotty was there. And so, for the past year, I'd held him accountable for no reason.
Right.
And so here's my son telling me that's not how this is going to go, Dad.
Yeah.
And he continued to do that. And to this day, and I wrote down verbatim exactly as he dictates. Now, there's times I'll talk back and forth, but these downloads, it's me. I do the exact same thing, sage, lining my chakras, candles, picture of him. I breathe in and during meditation at each level of the chakra, hold my breath 7 seconds, say his name. I do all the things I made none of these up. I picked these up all like pebbles along the way,
Yeah.
And, and Siesta Key sand, which is quartz crystal. Look it up, folks. I'm not BSing you.
Yeah.
And I spread that when I do it. And I wrote everything he gave me down. And I've done that to this day. So every meeting he's come through is in the book and the lessons that he's taught me,
Wow. And I'd love to hear, so how interesting. So you started off investigating, getting some confirmation from mediums, one in particular that was very impactful. And then you started down the path of saying, okay, my turn. I'm going to set out to communicate directly.
Right.
Wow. That's interesting. And you went for it, right?
I did, but I got to tell you, I went for it by trying to research, by going to see John Holland, seeing Thomas John, see Andrew Anderson, I went to Lilydale. I went to, it went to Arizona and I investigated places, but him coming through to me at 3:00 in the morning was not in my game plan.
Yeah.
And it was the best part of all of this, by the way.
Yeah.
Sedona's fine. I got to tell you, I went to Sedona and I was pretty disappointed. I went to Lilydale, which is the oldest spiritual community in the country, and I got knocked off my saddle. It was such an amazing experience.
Wow.
I go to Siesta Key, which is quartz crystal, and Lido Key, and I feel them around me. This year I saw the green flash for the first time, which is something we had talked about when he was a kid. And I knew it was him sending me that. The validations are incredible, unbelievable. And world famous to local people.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear, some of the messages that feel relevant to share that have come through, because you've now documented your communication with Christopher over now, most recently a second book. And so I'd love, just to, whatever from, the books you feel would be great to share.
Here's from the second book. And so remember, this is the second book. I've been doing this since 2016, right?
Yeah.
And actually downloading his messages since 2017.
Yeah.
But the second book, he says, here's just an example. I miss you too, Dad. We will share this place, this incredible place. It will be like crossing a shallow stream. You have to cross it by yourself, but I'm right on the other side. So it's just natural to walk across to me, and then you're in. You'll be on the other side, you and me. How's that for awesome? But not today. Today is for writing books and presentation. Carry the word, Pop. We're all behind you. Now, that's just boom, out of the blue. He told me when my sister, Marcia, who was his godmother and a huge source of love for me and a huge source of love and acceptance for him. She loved me when I wasn't so lovable,
Yeah.
And just adored her. And Chris felt the same way. They just had a bond, these two. So he said to me, Dad, I promise when Marcia crosses, I'll be there the minute she crosses. So Marcia had been dying of cancer for a few years and finally said, I'm done. I'm done with the treatment. I'm done. I'm doing this my way. And she did. And, and one of the greatest things, one of the greatest gifts I got out of writing a book was the week before she transitioned. I was in the hospital with her and she said, honey, you gave me the greatest gift. I read your book and I'm not afraid to die.
Wow.
Now, and she had a medium session where I expect Christopher to come through, but her late husband. I was like, you don't know what's, in my plan, I had for a couple of Christmases before I had bought her a medium session with a friend on the phone.
Yeah.
And I expected all about Christopher, and Christopher came through, and then her ex-husband did, and said things that they only knew about each other. It was really incredible. So when Marcia, by the way, a year later, I always see a medium on my birthday. And in the last 2 years, it's been Renee Russo out of New York, who's just amazing. We do it on the phone at the grave. She's just a phenomenal medium and a wonderful human being. But the year before that, I had Marcia transitioned in 2019. And so January of 2020, I went to a medium and she said, Chris is here, but there's also a woman here. She's pretty, glasses, maybe in her 40s. Marcia was in her 70s when she passed away. So what I consider is that they come through in their prime, right?
Yeah, right.
And she said, and she's got the title of mother, sister, aunt. I said, well, she was Christopher's godmother, but kind of a mom to me and my sister and his aunt. She goes, okay, she said to tell you, honey. And then she said, did she call you Joey? I said, yeah. She goes, Joey, thanks for giving me the greatest gift.
Wow.
Now you can't, none of that had been written. None of that's going to be written until the third book because it happened in 2019 and 20, right?
Right.
So Christopher told me that when Marcia transitions, he'll be there. And then he said, I told you she'd be there. We'd be there, Pop. When she crossed, we were all here for her. Jerry, Billy, Marcia, Pat, Bobby, Carrie, which is all the family on this side.
Wow.
My mom and dad didn't, but he said it was more siblings. So we were all there for her. And when you cross, the circle will be complete, he said. But Marcia joined the family. Then she had to go somewhere, like a spa. When she came back, she was younger than when I remember. So that's another reason I know this isn't me fabricating this, because I hadn't thought this through. But what happened is she died of cancer. And of course, the cancer stayed with her body on this side, but the trauma crossed with her, Brandon. So she had to go somewhere to process that trauma, like a spa. What a wonderful way to put it. And then she rejoined the family.
Wow.
So I think that's what happens when we have addiction, depression, speech impediments, learning disabilities, cancer. We go somewhere like a metaphysical car wash.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And get it cleansed and come back and join the group.
Yeah.
That makes more sense than I would even consider, so I know that wasn't me.
Yeah. Right. Are you familiar with, is it Journey of Souls, by Michael Newton or Destiny of Souls? Yeah. It makes me think of that because he talks a lot about, sort of these special places that we would go based off of, trauma or whatever a soul needed for kind of repair and rejuvenation.
Perfect. When there's, and then there's another thing, and I carry this in the second book, and I love this chapter, and it's called Thin Places. It's an Irish term that I stole from John Holland. I read one of his books. I go, great, perfect. And it's where the veil is thinnest between the two worlds, right? Mm-hmm. This bedroom here this office was his bedroom, right? Mm-hmm. This is a thin place. I feel him here all the time. All I got to do is meditate, and it comes through. I can feel him when he's here. I feel him on the back of my neck, and it's chill. I can smell him. I've only seen him twice in meditation. But that's something I'm hoping to do. And I think it takes more work on my end. I hear him, I feel him, and I'm not a medium. I don't want to be medium. I just want to connect with my kid,
Right.
Beaches in Florida. Why? Gulf Coast, Florida? I don't know. But I've walked on beaches in the middle of the night or, 11 o'clock at night and just felt him walk through me. Just literally. Thomas John said there was a night on a beach in Florida where he walked through you. And it was after my buddy's wedding. I did my Irish goodbye, disappear, drove to a beach and felt this amazing presence with the moon. For some reason, certain conditions, water, sand, crystals, moon, makes it something else,
Right.
So there's places that I like I said, I was a little disappointed in Sedona. I think the vortex has shifted a little bit. I went there and expected, skyrockets at night, afternoon delight, and and I got kind of, a couple of cool things, but I think it's up to us to do the work. One thing he asked me earlier is, what do you tell parents, and, I'll tell you this, I'm a different guy than I was before January 3rd, 2016, and Haruki Murakami says, once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure, in fact, whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what storms are all about, And that's what parents who've lost kids, they're in a storm and we're changed forever. I'm a kinder guy than I was. I'm supposed to. I'm given this great gift where I can connect with my kid, but I got to give it away to keep it. If I hoard this like Midas, God knows if it doesn't get taken away, and I'm not going to risk that. So I'm going to pull over like last night on the way home when that motorist was pulled over in a snowstorm, make sure they're okay, make sure that help is coming. I'm going to do that. That wasn't me prior to this, buddy. I promise you that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's a beautiful plus to such a, challenging thing for someone to go through. What an amazing, it's alchemy really, right? You're taking something and turning, a tragedy into,
and you can't unring the bell. What happened, right? We can't undo it. It's there. So it's not, and it's the same thing for parents out there. So now what are you going to do? You know, there's a wonderful book called The Shack where a guy lost, and it's turned into a very good movie too. And a guy, which is rare, and a guy lost his daughter in a horrific way. And he finds himself in the presence of God. And God said, just because I work incredible good out of unspeakable tragedies doesn't mean I orchestrate the tragedies, right? God didn't take Chris to put me on this path. Chris' free will caused him to go. That put me on this path. So it was like, what am I going to do after the storm? You know,
right.
And that's what I'm doing, talking to you.
Yeah, right. Well, so I'm curious as far as, you know, of the content in the book, is there anything that seems maybe interesting? I'm sure there's lots of interesting material in there, or surprising to share about Christopher's perspective of the other side, or, you know, reality in general. I mean, does he speak to some of that stuff?
He speaks to all of that stuff. You know, let's start with the other side, which I got to tell you, I've lived a life beyond my wildest dreams. Really, I have no right to be still here. The Vegas odds on me making 65, Brandon, weren't high. Trust me. You know, in my youth, you know, crash cars, bar fights, all the fiascos. You know, and yet here I am talking to somebody, hoping that a parent heart heals because of this. You know.
Yeah.
So right. Chris has come through to me and said, "Look, Pop, you know, your side is like football camp." He said, remember when you'd go, you know, I played football in high school, and they had wonderful facilities, and we'd stay for a week for summer camp. And he'd say, remember, you're in August, it's hot, you're sweating, you're physically exhausted, you're beaten up, you're sore, you know, but you had friendship, camaraderie, you're challenging each other. You know, he said, you know, it's difficult, but it's a wonderful existence. He said, that's your side. Yeah. He said, my side is a beach bungalow on Maui. You know, I got to tell you, you know, I've had this wonderful existence, and now I know, you know, if God tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, pal, you're pitching tomorrow," you know, I get to be with my kid on the other side in an existence that he describes as a beach bungalow in Maui. You know, now I'll tell you, my father-in-law, and my father-in-law was a decent guy. He wasn't a good dad. He wasn't a good dad. You know, egomaniac, you know, Harvard guy, MBA, you know, and he comes through all the time to apologize to Sal. And he's coming through a bunch of times to me. And I'll say, Warren, you know, save it. This is my dime. You know what I mean? Go talk to your daughter. You know, text me a message. I don't want you. You know, I got other family I want to talk to.
Yeah.
But
get
Warren
off the line.
Get off the line, bro. And Warren comes through, and I've had Thomas John say, Sally and I were both there together, and said, you know, did Warren like to bird hunt? And which was, he loved it. She goes, because I see him in the field, you know, with a dog. Did he used to be did he collect urns and treasures? And was there something about a ship? Now, there is no way. Sally's maiden name is Stearns, my McQuillen, no way to put that together. Warren raised a Spanish galleon, was a collector of antiquities, loved the bird hunt, you know. And Andrew said, look, you know, he hasn't evolved much, but he's happy. And his existence is bird hunting, walking through the fields with a dog. You know, so Chris is a beach bungalow in Maui. Warren's is there. So, you know, I get the message. It's what you want it to be. You make. Yeah. You call your heaven. What's your heaven? And mine is, I know he's with family. Here's a funny story. I went and saw Thomas John. Now, I'd seen him one-on-one a couple of years before, and he was absolutely amazing. I mean, amazing. So we go see him at the Infinity Center, which is in Highland Park, next town over. And I see that he's going to come. And I said, hey, you want to go see Thomas John? I said, well, stop, get some barbecue. You know, there was a real urban barbecue on the way. So how do you go wrong? Thomas John and barbecue. And Sally said, yeah. So we got there early, and we did what is very foreign to me. I sat in the front, and I was on time. I usually not either one except for a golf tee time. And he spent the entire time on the other side of the room. It's 200 people. And he said, maybe 150 people. And he sat the entire time on the other side of the room. But he kept looking over his shoulder. And he was spot on. He was talking about a woman who's maid of honor, you know, died of an overdose, and that she has her she has her dress, and they'd gone to Vegas the week before. I mean, things that were just like, it was
Wow.
like a machine gun, right?
Yeah.
Then he kept looking over and he goes, there's a family that members just keep showing up. And Thomas laughed and said, and frankly, they kind of scare me. But he was kidding, of course, And Sally elbowed me and said, that's your family, right? I said, it might be. And Thomas said, okay, let's address this. He said, who's got an older brother whose name is Jerry, but it's not Gerald?
Huh.
And I raised my hand. I said, that's my oldest brother was Jeremiah. Jerry. He goes, yeah. He goes, so Pat, Billy, Bobby, and your son, Chris, are all here. He said, and Christopher's making bunny ears behind Pat's head. He said, does that make sense? I said, yeah. Did they always tease Pat? He said, which brother that I named took his life in the 70s? And I said, it's Bobby. He said, yeah, he's here too. He named them by name.
Wow.
Then he said, after we went through the messages and Chris saying he's the best looking spirit in the room and laughing, Chris said, everybody's fading back, Thomas said, but Chris is bringing a young man named Jeremy forward to connect with his mom because Jeremy's shy and he's trying to back away and Chris won't let him. So who's a mom named Martha, whose son Jeremy died transitioned last year. Woman raised her hand. She said, thank Christopher, because your son wouldn't have come through without Christopher's prompting. He said, wow, think about it like Chris has his arm around his shoulders.
Wow.
Then he came to us at the end and said, who's Sally? And I pointed to my wife. He said, no. 100 years old, other side, Sally. I said, well, that's her grandmother. She was named after, who died at 100 years old.
Wow.
Different name. Sally's Stearns. Nanny's name was Mickle, right? There's no way to connect these dots, bro. Yeah. There's no way not to connect these dots.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's really, really something. What a journey.
Now that we know they're there, right? Now through this whole 45-minute journey that I've been on with you, they're there. What are you going to do about it? Parents who've lost a kid,
Right.
Reach out to a medium, try to meditate, find your thin places, connect. Your kid wants to connect with you. The brilliant author, Susan Giesman, who I consider a friend now, wrote a book called Still Right Here, because these kids are still right here, and they're knocking on the window, and you got to do your part. Think of the old days with a cell when you'd go to the dock or off somebody's balcony to get cell reception.
Yeah.
That's what you got to do, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Put in the work and you can got to meet halfway, I suppose, right?
And maybe even a little more, because we're kind of spiritual slugs, and so we've got to raise our consciousness up and they got to raise their down, and it's work for them. I'm told that's not easy, coming down the floor to talk to us.
Has Christopher shared any insights into, reincarnation or any of those sort of concepts, parallel lives or other lives?
Yeah. And I tell you what, a big fear I had was that we were going to cross on the metaphysical superhighway. I was going to be transitioning. He was going to come home. Yeah. And Bob Olson's book has a wonderful section, and I quote it and give him total credit in the first book, about souls being a body of water. Your spirit's a body of water, and each wave is a soul, right? So even if Christopher comes back, his soul as Christopher McQuillen, my son, will be there when I get there. So he's talked about, I've been told that I'll recognize his children in my children's kids' eyes. So I know he has said that his one regret, and it's funny, they say they don't have regrets, they don't miss us. And he contradicts that all the time. There are regrets. And there's one regret is he didn't get to be a father. He thought he was wonderful kids. Kids adored him. That's his job over there. And that he didn't get to be a dad. And he honors me with being a very good dad, and that he would have been a really good one too. So that I know he'll come back and fulfill that role. But I also know that my son will still be with me on the other side. Well, Christopher, the father, will be, was transitioned back in that form. He talks about twin flames, that he and I are twin flames, which is different than than soulmates, which I think is a hallmark term, right? That we've actually share a soul, and we've done it for many lifetimes, which is why we're so comfortable with each other, which is why we can connect like this, which is why he can flip a switch and come through,
Yeah, right. Yeah, interesting. I like that is an interesting thing that idea that maybe some haven't considered, twin flames being non, male, female, or,
Right.
like father, son, as opposed to.
Yeah. And there's no doubt. And I'm doing, I love to say that I'm sitting on my butt, but I'm about ankle deep in knowledge of the other side, right? After 6 years. So now coming forward, I'm going to a place north of Tampa. That's a spiritual Casadega, which is a spiritual offshoot of Lilydale in Florida. I'm going to there in February. And I also want to get connected with past life regression, because I know we've spent other lives together, and I wouldn't mind knowing about them, so you go into a bit of a hypnosis and your story gets laid out for you. I'll tell you a really cool story. I was a year ago, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'll go to Florida for a little bit. It's my sister's house. I rented from her kids, who were wonderful. And Chris was very happy there. Marsha was very happy there. I called a medium friend just to say hello, because I hadn't talked to her in a while. And she said, "Christopher, where are you?" Chris always comes through to her. "Christopher, where are you?" Well, Chris not here, but somebody else is here. Are you in your sister's house? I go, "Yeah, I am." And she just knew I was calling her, right? I was in Naples, Florida. I said, "Yeah," and I was walking around as I do, because I'm a little high energy, a little ADD, and I had a headset on and talking to her, and she said, Marsha said she's glad you're enjoying her house. She said, "Were you with her at her grave at her anniversary?" I said, "Yeah, I was," which was a couple of weeks before. And she said, "Okay, Marsha wants to know where the keys are." So when I had left to go to Siesta Key to meet my wife up in Siesta Key, I'd put the keys under the mat, because that's what we were told to do. The cleaning guy would come get them. And so I went, looked under the mat, no key. It's like, so I walked to the kitchen, and on a hook by the refrigerator or by the telephone was a set of master keys, right? The master set. So I took those off, put them in my pocket. I'm on the phone, and she said, "Marsha said, put the keys back on the hook." We weren't Zooming, Brandon. This was a phone call. It's like, so I just laughed and knew Marsha was there and felt her around me the entire trip,
Wow.
Every moment in her house. Her spirit moved very freely there and very happily. And my son did too. Even as a young boy, he'd come there. Anytime he'd be in Florida, he'd make his way to Aunt Marsha's house, to be loved up a little bit. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Well, usually around this time into the show, I ask for a story of synchronicity, serendipity, positive paranormal story, spiritual breadcrumb story. But I think this whole episode has been that. As we sort of wind down and here, is there any like message or story or anything that just feels like pertinent, that's bubbling up, that you just want to get out to the listeners and share?
Yeah. First of all, there was a wonderful movie called What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams
I love
and Cuba Gooding Jr. And Robin Williams was a little shocked that he was on the other side. And Cuba said, "Look, the origin of the word body is bodig, Anglo-Saxon term, meaning abode, which is what the physical body is. It's a transient dwelling for the real self." He said, "Like you're in your house right now. You're in your house. That doesn't mean you are your house. Your house falls down. You get up and walk away." And that's what happened. Your house, and it's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to me. It's happened to our kids. It's happened to our parents. The house falls down. We get up and walk away. But that doesn't mean we can't connect. Chris told me early on, he said, "Look, Dad, I'm moving up in levels." He said, "I'm the smartest guy in the room now." He wasn't a great student, and he was very pleased. He even told me he speaks French now. He said, "I'm the smartest guy in the room." He said, "But understand, me connecting with you as I go up in levels is no different than me calling you from Tucson or from LA." He said, "It's still the same connection." He said, "So please don't worry about that." So that connection's there. So all I want to tell you is it's real important, parents. There's not a void. They're not gone. By the way, I would trade all this metaphysical information, data, knowledge, books, interviews for one Monday night football game eating pizza with my kid or a golf round, right?
Yeah, right.
But you can't unring that bell. I mean,
Yep.
it's a bad deal, but it's so much better than believing they're gone. They're in your lives.
Yeah.
They will affect
Yeah.
your lives. They can help you. They can do things. Chris was screwing with your electronics at 3:00 this morning. I'm sitting there writing, and my second screen lit up and then went down, then lit up. I hadn't touched the computer. Computer had been turned off for 15 minutes, right?
Yep.
And what they're validating, if they can do that, they can affect other things. And it's always got to be for your good or the good of others,
Yeah. Yeah.
Still right here.
It's and it's, when you start to think in terms of eternity or, no time, infinity, it makes sense. I think my theory is, from the grand scheme, the bigger, the zoomed out view, it's all a gift, including losing someone that you're so intimately tied to, because you get the, you get the opportunity. It's like, you think about, like I said, in terms of eternity, it's like exposure can breed indifference. If you have the opportunity to get some space from that which you love, then now once you are reconvened, it's got, it's fresh again. It's like having your favorite meal every night for a year. It's no longer your favorite meal. And so, I believe that's part of the dance with these sorts of tragedies that are going on. It's part of a bigger narrative that is unfolding for.
And we're all going. We're all going, Brandon.
Yeah.
We'll go away for the weekend somewhere and we look up hotels and restaurants, right? We're all going to eternity, and not too many people are really interested in what's next, right?
Yeah.
We're all going. I got the clue. I know what it's like. I've got no fear. It's time to go. It's time to go.
Yeah. Well, this story is certainly inspiring. I so appreciate you taking the time to come on and share and really alchemize your tragedy into inspiration.
Can we plug the books
inspiration?
A little bit?
Of
I got
course,
2 books.
Yeah, please.
My Search for Christopher on the Other Side was published 2018, and we're not done yet. Pop, My Lesson from the Other Side, I just published in November. They're both, they're great books because they're kind of boots on the ground from a regular guy on an amazing journey. And I think they'll help. They're available on Amazon,
Great.
And if you love the books, write a review. And if you don't, keep it to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Good reviews are, please, bad reviews, keep it to yourself. I love that. Well, I do have one final question here for you, and it is this. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life, according to Joe McQuillen?
The meaning of life is really the journey, right? And to me, it's getting our way back to our Heavenly Father. And I wouldn't have talked about this before 2016. I'm not religious. I'm not. I probably haven't, other than in a wedding or two, been in a church since we buried Chris. I got no issues with the church. It's just not where I find God.
Yeah.
But I know through this journey with Chris, what the other side's about. Mm-hmm. And it's everything they talk about, heaven, whatever you call it, but that's what the other side is. So all of what we're doing here is what my friend Craig McMahon calls Earth School, right?
Yeah.
There'll be a life review. Do something decent for somebody else. Because when you're going through a life review, you're going to feel the hurt that you caused other people, and you'll feel the joy and comfort you've given them too, and I'm not looking for justice, buddy. I'm just praying for mercy, so any good I can do, I'm going to do, not only because it's going to pave the path a little bit, but I live my life 2 ways right now, Brennan, 2 ways. One is to please my God, and the other is to make my son proud. And as long as I live my life according to those 2 tenets, I can't go wrong, and I'll be with him again on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
I always call it the good kind of selfish. And, it's probably a podcast for another day. My perspective on God is there's only one. God is me,
He's
you, everything. So it's like we're fractals of it's ultimately, I believe, learning self-love is so important because we're fractals of source, God, higher self, the universe, whatever consciousness, whatever you want to call it.
Yahweh,
trying to put
the higher spirit, the sacred, right?
Yeah.
The source, man. He's the source.
Yep. And it is all, and we are a part of that all, and therefore it is an extension of self. And so thank you for taking the time to come on.
My pleasure.
Share your insight. And Christopher, thank you for doing what you do from the other side to make this message possible.
Well, thanks for helping getting his word out there. It's important. His words are important.
Pleasure is mine. And all of you out there for tuning your beautiful brain waves and incredible hearts in. Thank you yet again. And until next time, journey well. Also, before we sign off, I wanted to remind you to download the Golden Key audio or ebook as my free gift to you at goldenkey.gift using the Golden Key code POSITIVEHEAD. And please, if you enjoy my gift, leave a positive review on Amazon so others can find the book and unlock their lives with the help of the Golden Key as well.